There was a time in America when the idea of being well off didn't require a six-figure salary or a lifetime of debt. In the early 1950s, an ordinary family could look at their life and feel something many people today still chase: security, not luxury, not excess. Just enough. A typical house in 1950 cost a fraction of what we expect now. Yet it offered something far greater than square footage or modern upgrades. It came with a yard where children played until sunset, wooden floors that carried the sound of everyday life, and a front porch where neighbors stopped to talk. These weren't just houses. They were anchors, places where families built routines, traditions, and a sense of belonging. Money worked differently then. It stretched. A single income often supported an entire household, covering not just the basics, but also small comforts: a family car, a modest vacation, maybe even a little save for the future. There was no constant pressure to upgrade, no endless cycle of replacing what still worked. What people had, they used. What they owned, they valued. But the real wealth of that era wasn't measured in dollars. It was found in something less tangible. Communities were tighter. People recognized the faces around them. A trip to the store wasn't just an errand, it was a conversation. Daily life moved at a pace that allowed moments to settle rather than rush past unnoticed. This wasn't a perfect time, and it certainly wasn't simple for everyone. But it was a world where enough felt clearly defined. A home, a steady job, and a sense of place in the community. These were the foundations of a life that many considered complete. And as we look back on the 1950s, it raises a question that still lingers today. In our pursuit of more, did we leave something valuable behind?
To understand daily life in the 1950s, you have to look at the small transactions, the quiet exchanges that made up an ordinary day. Prices were lower, yes, but more importantly, they felt manageable. There was a clear relationship between what you earned and what you spent. And for many families, that balance created a sense of control. Fuel, for example, wasn't something you budgeted around with anxiety. Filling up the car was quick, affordable, and often came with a bit of service. Stations weren't just places to pay and leave. An attendant might step out, greet you politely, check your oil, and clean your windshield before sending you on your way. It was a routine interaction, but one that reflected a slower, more personal rhythm of life. Groceries followed a similar pattern. Stores were smaller, often locally owned and familiar. You didn't wander through endless aisles comparing dozens of nearly identical products. Choices were limited but dependable. A few staples: bread, milk, fresh produce were all most households needed to get through the week. And when you stepped up to the counter, you were often greeted by name. Income, by modern standards, appears modest. But in context, it carried real weight. A yearly salary could support rent or a mortgage, keep food on the table, and still leave room for occasional extras. Spending wasn't driven by impulse or convenience, it was intentional. Purchases were thought through, sometimes delayed, and often appreciated more because of it. Even small pleasures felt accessible. Cold drink, a simple snack, a night out at the movies — these weren't luxuries reserved for special occasions. They were part of everyday life, affordable enough to enjoy without second thoughts. There was also a kind of transparency to it all. Prices were straightforward. Payments were made in cash more often than not. There were fewer hidden costs, fewer layers of complexity. What you saw was what you paid, and that simplicity shaped how people approached their finances. Looking back, it's not just the numbers that stand out, it's the feeling behind them. Daily life wasn't dominated by financial strain in the way many experience today. Instead, there was a sense that the essentials were within reach, and that stability, more than anything else, defined the cost of living. In the 1950s, the automobile was more than a way to get from one place to another. It was a statement. For many families, owning a car represented progress, independence, and a tangible sign that they were moving forward in life. It sat in the driveway, not just as transportation, but as a reflection of identity. Design played a major role in that feeling. Cars of the era weren't built to blend in. They were bold, polished, and unmistakably styled. Chrome accents caught the sunlight, curved bodies gave them motion even at a standstill, and two-tone paint jobs turned everyday streets into something closer to a showroom. Even parked at the curb, a well-kept car seemed to carry a kind of pride with it. Driving itself was a different experience. Roads were less crowded, traffic was lighter, and the journey often mattered as much as the destination. Without an interconnected highway system in the early part of the decade, long trips required planning and a bit of patience. Paper maps were unfolded across dashboards, directions were memorized or scribbled down, and wrong turns were simply part of the adventure. There was also a mechanical simplicity to these vehicles. Drivers understood their cars in a way that feels uncommon today. If something went wrong, it wasn't unusual to lift the hood and try to fix it yourself, or to have a neighbor step in and help. Cars weren't sealed systems, they were machines you could learn, maintain, and take pride in keeping alive. For families, the car became a shared space. Weekend drives, errands, and vacations all unfolded within those metal frames. Children squeezed into the back seat, windows rolled down, while the radio played softly in the background. It wasn't always comfortable, and it certainly wasn't high-tech, but it carried something more important, a sense of freedom. That freedom mattered. The ability to go where you wanted, when you wanted, even if it was just a short drive across town, gave people a feeling of control over their lives. In a world that was still finding its modern shape, the car offered something simple and powerful: the open road, and the promise that it led somewhere worth going.